Set your course for the Hoth
Takes podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Hoth Takes. I'm Grace Seegers.
I'm Haley Verdewelt.
And I'm Eric Geller.
And today we are going to be talking about the return of one of our favorite Star Wars shows, and certainly at least my favorite live-action Star Wars show, Andor. It is coming back on, I want to say, Tuesday, April 22nd. Yes, that is a Tuesday. And we have been waiting a very long time for this. 3 years, 2.5 years. We have been eagerly anticipating the return of Andor. And this season is going to be a little bit different because they're going to be dropping 3 episodes at a time over 4 weeks. So I'm sure we'll get to talking about, whether we expect the timing of the release to affect the momentum at all. But first, I just wanted to start off by asking Eric and Haley sort of what you're most looking forward to about the return of Andor and what you're most excited to see.
For me, it's like wanting to see more of the early years of the rebellion, and specifically wanting to see how we go from Mon and Saw and Luthen being kind of either at odds, or maybe with Mon and Saw not even knowing about each other yet. I'm not quite sure about that. I don't remember where we are at this point, but going from something like that to Mon very much as the leader, and then Luthen and Saw out of the picture. I mean, by the time of by the time of A New Hope, neither of them is in the picture as far as we know. So how do we get there? What does Mon do to step up and take charge? I've said for a while now that I think we're going to see Luthen marginalized by Mon because he's a little bit too rough around the edges. He's not diplomatic enough, not tactful enough, and he kind of alienates people. Same with Saw. I think we're going to see them pushed out. Tony Gilroy has talked a little bit about the idea that the people who are the early leaders of the resistance movement end up getting pushed to the fringes by the next generation, and I think we're going to see that with Mon. So I'm curious to see how she kind of steps into her own as a leader of this fringe movement and tries to make it more mainstream, and what that does to her relationships with Luthen and Saw.
I agree with all that. I am, like, the things that I loved about Andor last time were just like it felt very real. Like it was not like in the cube that they used the volume to do filming. So I'm excited to see like the cinematography and the backdrops and the Star Wars food. That's one thing that I'm excited for. And what I hope to see is kind of a follow-up from Narkina 5 and like the prison camp there, like what happened to those prisoners.
So I'm glad you mentioned the feeling of realness, because you were, talking about like the actual groundedness of it and the cinematography and the sets. But something that I really liked about Andor Season 1, and that a lot of people liked about Andor Season 1, is that it's fundamentally a story about resisting an authoritarian government that controls its populace through a mixture of physical force and just overwhelming bureaucracy. And the first season felt very resonant. It felt very relevant. At the risk of approaching a potentially touchy subject, how do we think it's going to feel to be watching Andor in 2025 in season 2?
I think there's a lot of interest right now, as you mentioned, in understanding how governments use the tools at their disposal to encourage people to behave a certain way or force them to behave a certain way, and how different parts of, I love that you use the word bureaucracy, because that's a really important way to frame it, is this structure, this system of systems that we either rarely think about or never think about. You think about it when you go to the DMV, you think about it when you pay your taxes, but there's so much machinery behind the scenes. And I think, as you said, one of the strengths of the show is that in an interesting and fun way, not a boring way, it explores how those tools, that machinery, can be wielded for good or for ill. And I think that Star Wars from the beginning has been political. Tony Gilroy has talked about how he's well informed by all the revolutions of the past and drawing comparisons between that and this. And it's going to be very difficult to watch this show in 2025 and not take away certain parallels or metaphors, depending on where you are in the political spectrum, between Star Wars and what we're seeing right now in the United States, especially, but also in other countries.
I'll just upvote what Eric said.
Just a little Reddit upvote there. Yeah, I'm really excited about this element because obviously we are all politics nerds, and I thought that's something that Andor season 1 did really well, was, as I said, showing the bureaucracy, but like very much showing the politics of the ISB. And it seemed very real and informed by the current world, as all good speculative fiction is. So I'm also excited to see if there are any like pithy lines of dialogue that help encapsulate sort of the current state of the world. Like a quote I think a lot about from the first season, and I may not get it exactly right, but it's Nemec says something like, the pace of repression outstrips our ability to understand it. And I think that quote has only become more relevant in recent years. So I'm interested to see how pointed it gets. And, maybe it'll be impossible not to read anything into it. But, it's a story about authoritarianism, and I think that there's been a lot of stories about that kind of thing in pop culture recently. So I'm really interested to see sort of what happens there.
Yeah, and thinking about that great scene at Mon Mothma's dinner party, where there's a bunch of, I assume they're all senators, but there are people at the party talking about the Emperor, and someone is like, what do you have to worry about if you don't have anything to hide? Or like, he said what he wanted to do from the beginning. You can't be surprised by this. And I think we're going to see in season 2 the Gorman massacre, which is this famous act of war crime brutality that convinces Mon Mothma to leave the Senate and denounce Palpatine and really move towards starting the rebellion. And I wonder how much, either with that or maybe with something else that we don't even know about, we're going to see that dynamic of people safe, ensconced in the core worlds on Coruscant talking about, well, this is like, he said he would govern with a strong hand. This is about protecting law and order. This is about stopping insurrection. Why are you complaining? Why are you pitying, those folks who rose up and were stopped? Like, I think that dynamic, which we saw a hint of in season 1, could be very potent in season 2, given what we know is coming and what might accompany it.
Another thing that I really liked about the first season was that it felt, even though it was very much a Star Wars story and grounded in that universe, like the story couldn't exist if you pulled it out of Star Wars. It was very much integrated into that. But at the same time, it almost felt like a standalone story. Like my mom, who doesn't really like Star Wars, watched it and enjoyed it a lot. There were no Jedi, there were no Skywalkers, there, wasn't the Force. Do we think, Haley, would you like to see the second season continue this trend, or do you want to see some Jedi show up?
No, I don't. I want it to, I feel like it would detract from the, relatability of it. These are normal people trying to pursue freedom for themselves and their neighbors. And Jedi can do that. Jedi can be somewhat normal, but I feel like in this time period, it's not the savior yet. They're not there yet. They were just massacred.
Yeah.
So I would prefer not to, but I don't quite know the chronology. If it's my favorite Jedi, Ezra, if that's around, but I feel like he's like a baby. So I'm not, Eric can correct me on that. So I would make one exception.
I think Ezra is old enough. I mean, the show takes place simultaneously with parts of Rebels, so he could, I mean, he's old enough. Are we going to see our favorite Blueberry Jedi show up? It's probably a long shot.
Yeah, I would maybe make an exception for Ezra or maybe for Kanan, but really, like I agree with you. I don't want there to be secret Jedi or secret Skywalkers or like there is always that speculation about, you know, is Luthen a Jedi? And I'm really hoping no. I'm really hoping he's just like a guy who is really good at flying and is mysterious, but is just a guy.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it would undermine a lot of what Tony Gilroy's been doing in terms of showing a grounded version of Resistance, a world where you don't have that shining paragon to look up to. I think it would undermine that to say that one of these people who has shown us a very realistic version of insurgency actually has this sort of space wizard background, even if he can't be the knight in shining armor that the Jedi of the prequels were, because he's got to be undercover. I think just giving him that background, it doesn't add luster to him in the way that like a Jedi in the prequels would be cool and fancy and shiny. It actually takes away relatability in a way that I think would, like I said, undermine what he was trying to do there. So I'm not expecting that. But only because I trust Tony Gilroy's vision so much do I have sort of confidence that I think we're not going to see that.
Eric's theme this episode is very much like, in Tony we trust.
Yeah, I mean, he knows what he's doing. He's arguably the only Star Wars showrunner who has consistently known what he's doing, so I gotta put my faith in him.
To be fair, only one season has come out. Like, we shall see if it remains consistent.
That's true. I guess, people did... I don't know that we thought this way. I'd have to go back and listen. But people did love the first season of The Mandalorian. So if we're just saying season 1 to season 1 comparison, is Andor so much more successful, not better quality-wise, but successful as Star Wars than The Mandalorian? I mean, I would probably say yes, but I think there's some people who would say they're on an even par in terms of accomplishing something impressive for Star Wars.
I would say Andor's much more ambitious writing. I mean, it's like...
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to do the sort of episodic, like, new story each week kind of thing than telling a sweeping story like this. And I think you guys would agree. So
yeah,
totally.
I guess I do have more trust because of that, because they pulled off a very compelling story across the first season as opposed to like a bunch of smaller stories that were good. Again, I think I said this in one of our recent episodes, I am worried that they condensed the timeline and we were going to have more seasons, and then they were like, I can't spend my whole life doing this show, so we're only doing 2. So I'm a little bit concerned about this scheme to just have like 3 episodes for each like part of the next season. I don't know what to make of that. I'm sure it'll be good though. Like 95% chance that it'll be good.
I would like to upvote everything that Haley has just said. You do actually bring me to another point that I want to talk about, which I mentioned when we were first starting this episode. So as you were saying, Haley, they initially thought about it being more seasons, and then they ended up condensing the timeline. The thing that I'm really worried about is parceling out the episodes in 3 episode pieces, so like basically dropping a movie every week rather than just dropping an episode. And I'm of the unpopular opinion that sometimes shows work better when you're not binge watching them. Like, I think that for a show of this gravity, sort of the week in between, like, gives it a bit of space. So I'm worried about whether dropping 3 episodes and then having to wait a week will sort of halt the momentum. Like, maybe you'll be getting really into it and then you have to wait a week. So how do you guys feel about that sort of strategy of release?
Ugh, it was so frustrating with Severance. That's my opinion. They should have put all the show out at once.
So you have like the opposite take as me.
I think that they're probably going to work out as chapters in the bigger story because it was apparently, according to Tony Gilroy, it was designed from the beginning to be released this way. So each night we're going to get 3 episodes that tell one part of the story, and it won't feel like a to be continued situation because there's that time gap. So in other words, it's hard to do the like, you know, the season 1, we're getting ready to do the raid on Aldhani, come back next week to see the raid, because next week there will have been a year-long gap. So like, what could you set up in terms of like, we're about to pull the trigger on something that you would be able credibly to say, you know, we waited a year to show you what happened next. I think all the action, all the like interpersonal stuff that's like directly kind of cliffhangery is going to have to be shown within those 3 episodes. I don't expect cliffhangers in the traditional sense between the blocks of episodes because I'm not aware of a show that has done that in this way with year-long breaks between the acts, if you will, having cliffhangers between the acts. I guess it's possible, and you could just hand wave away, oh yeah, that got resolved off screen the next day, and now it's a year later, and here's the aftermath. But something tells me that's not the approach they're going to take.
I just feel skeptical about it. I seriously would rather them have billed it as movies instead of separate episodes. Because it feels weird to me, even if they are in chapters. I don't know. I'm very ready and willing to be proven wrong on that point. I do understand where you're coming from, Haley, where like a show like Severance that is so twisty and addicting, you want them to drop it all at once. But I also kind of like the communal viewing element of it. Like you watch an episode of something and then you all gather around the water cooler, only you don't. You all gather around the internet, I guess, and talk about it the next day. I just like, you know, if we're really going to take a step back and talk about broader American society, I feel like we don't have this kind of communal things anymore. Like, we're not all... It's not the 1980s and 100 million people watched the finale of MASH. Like, we don't have communal things in the same way. And I sort of like when everyone's watching a show and it sort of forces the communality every week.
I think Andor can heal us. I think Andor can be the thing that brings us all together to talk about.
There definitely won't be any dumb, like, culture war complaints about this show. That's my prediction.
What a great prediction. You should put money on that one. So to switch gears a little bit, I want to talk about the cast and the characters that we're going to be seeing. So we know we're going to have Ben Mendelsohn joining the cast as Orson Krennic, who was the bad guy in Rogue One. We're going to be seeing Forrest Whitaker as Saw Gerrera. What I'm most excited about is seeing K2SO, Andor's fun sidekick droid voiced by Alan Tudyk. He's going to be in this season, and I'm really excited about it. Do we expect any other cameos? We kind of talked about this about maybe Ezra, but are there any other characters we think we might see? Like, are they gonna do a Darth Vader drop? That'd be kind of insane.
The one reason that I think you could make an argument for Darth Vader, and I don't believe this, but if you really want to say that you think you're going to see Darth Vader, there is a clip in the trailer of Dedra Meero clutching her throat and seeming to kind of try to loosen her collar a little bit, which has got people talking about whether perhaps she's being force choked. Again, I don't think that's what's going on there, but if you are looking forward to seeing Darth Vader, that's the theory that you're probably going to want to hang your hat on.
Yeah, I would support that. I feel like it's so classic Star Wars. And, like, they did such a good job of Vader in Rogue One. I feel like they're allowed the indulgence of bringing him into the second season here.
Like, okay, everyone else, when they bring in Darth Vader, it's like, all right. But when Andor brings in Darth Vader, like, all right, now we're cooking.
I would actually disagree with that for those who would argue that. And I would say that it's a show that works well because those larger-than-life figures are not in it. We know they exist. We know they're metaphorically right around the corner. But we don't see the Emperor. We don't see Vader. And it's almost more dramatic to know that they are doing their thing elsewhere and that these are the people who are in some ways serving as the foundation for that whole superstructure that they are at the tip of. I like a show like this not bringing those people in directly. But again, in Tony, I trust. If he thinks he's got some brilliant reason to use Darth Vader, I'm willing to be convinced.
What do you think, Haley?
I feel like maybe it's just because it's one of the things I remember the most from my first watching of Star Wars, but like as a kid I thought it was a very striking scene when Darth Vader shows up and he's like giving the bureaucrats the what for, and they're like, you're just some magician, like your fake religion, and he's like choking them. So I'm always for one of those scenes if it's the bureaucrats versus Darth Vader. I think it's a very fun dynamic.
Yeah, we do know that this show loves its bureaucrats. So for me personally, like I said, I'm really excited to see K2SO. He's one of my favorite characters from Rogue One, and I'm looking forward to seeing his arc and seeing, how does an Imperial droid become basically a rebel spy. But as I was sort of thinking about this question, I was also thinking about how it ties into Cassian's larger arc. This is a show named after him. And we very much saw him in the first season kind of going from criminal to reluctant rebel. And then we know he needs to get this season from like lower level rebel figure to, by Rogue One, being a major figure in the rebellion. So what do we expect to see from his arc this season, or what would we like to see?
I'm going to say something potentially disappointing, which is that with everything else that this show has going on, I'm not actually sure I want it to devote a lot of time to K2SO. He's obviously very important to Cassian, but I think the meet cute and the whole like reprogramming him and making him his buddy, I hope it happens toward the end, and I hope it's brief because I think the show has so much else to focus on. I know, if you had asked me before season 1 premiered, was I bummed that we were told that he wasn't going to be in season 1, and what did I want to see from him in season 2 if they made one? I would have all kinds of ideas of the adventures I wanted them to go on, but then we actually got season 1, and it dropped all of these other morsels that are now going to be expanded on. I don't know how you give K2SO top billing and also pay off everything else that we've seen in season 1.
I don't think you need to give him top billing, but I think he can be more than just like a cameo.
Yeah, I mean, I think that maybe the final arc of the show will have them together doing a mission or something together. I mean, I wouldn't want him relegated to cameo because I think he is fun, but it's interesting thinking about him in Rogue One. He's basically just comic relief. And is that what we want to focus on in Andor? With everything else going on, do we want to lean heavily on Alan Tudyk making irreverent jokes? Like, don't get me wrong, I loved it when it was in its context in Rogue One, but I'm not sure I want that to be a strong focal point of the show.
I like comic relief, but I also see what Eric is saying. So I'm open to either outcome. I'm okay with it. I'm at peace.
I will point out that while I brought up K2SO, my question was about Cassian himself, which Eric sidestepped that question, so we're gonna toss it to Haley now, and then Eric can go back to it.
Okay, that's validating because I was thinking of Cassian, and then we were talking about K2SO.
My bad.
I think it's in the show notes, Eric. I think that's why. I think you were thinking about it because I just referred to the Google Doc the secret Google Doc that our listeners will never get to experience. They can only dream of.
Unless they Venmo us like $100, and then they can look at the.
Yeah, if you're a Hoth Takes Plus subscriber, you can get access to the Google Doc.
In OnlyFans, but for the Google Doc.
OnlyHoths.
OnlyHoths. There we go.
So I feel like one of Cassian's arcs in the first season, and maybe I'm misremembering, so you guys could correct me. What I'm remembering is like he gets better at killing and taking human life across the course of the season. He also becomes less like queasy about the morality of like his decisions. So it starts with a murder that he does, but it just escalates to more and more violence. And this is kind of cerebral, but I would like to see him sort of grapple with the like morality of rebellion. And honestly, I feel like they can do it well. And by the time we meet him in Rogue One, he like just seems completely devoted to the cause and willing to leave behind an ally. So like, I don't know. I find his view of human life is interesting to me, and alien life, of course, in Star Wars, because like in the prison he's working to rescue so many people, and theoretically the rebellion is to help people who are oppressed, and yet there are like casualties in war, and like how does he think about that, and does it not him at all?
Yeah, so I think for me, you know, the story arc that I want to see for K2SO is no.
I'm gonna reach through like the microphone and punch you.
Okay, I would say I would put a spin on what Haley said. I want to see him grapple with not so much the morality of like rebellion and things like that, but the wisdom of it. Like, in other words, it's clear in season 1 that he is not, as Haley said, committed to the cause. He doesn't seem to believe that it is worth trying to do, that it has any degree of success, that it's worth blood, sweat, and tears. And of course, by Rogue One, as you said, Haley, he's fully committed. Where does that commitment come from? Part of what we see from him in the show is, you know, he gets more comfortable with killing, but that's not all you need to be a successful rebel. You also have to believe that killing and deception and various other things are actually worth it because you have some degree of success, that there is not just a moral imperative to act, but also a chance of accomplishing something. And I want to see, maybe this is harder to show than like him getting more comfortable with killing. I want to see him coming around to the belief that actually this is worth doing because it's possible that it might succeed. Like, I want to see him becoming a believer in the chance for success. And I don't know how you show that, but I want to see that happen. Because even in the prison, he's really fighting for his own life. And essentially everything else he does, yes, it's motivated by a desire to help others, but it's also part of an immediate plan to get himself out of there. And he wants to help people he now knows directly. There's a certain element of like personal connection. But to be a successful rebel, you have to put your life on the line for the belief, the movement, the idea, the notion that you will save lives who maybe aren't even born yet. And I think that's a different degree of commitment ideologically, but then also personal risk and danger to say, I'm going to do these various things and go on these missions for the idea that people in the future will be safe. That's a step beyond what we see in the prison, and I want to see him get there.
Haley, I think that's a really interesting point you made about the about Andor becoming more okay with death and with taking a life as the first season goes on, and I think it's very much in keeping with what we see in Rogue One, where he is pretty cool with leaving people behind and with killing Jin's dad because it's necessary. And I think your 2 points sort of dovetail into each other. Like, there's a connection between Cassian becoming more okay with killing as part of the rebellion and seeing the rebellion as something that can succeed. It's like these two sort of beliefs feed into each other. Like, there is a threshold of violence that is necessary to have a successful rebellion. Like, both of those things become part of his ideology and are crystallized by the time we get to Rogue One. So honestly, both of you have made me think about this in new ways. And I kind of want to see the mixture of both of those things, like him becoming in some ways more callous, but in other ways like more devoted, and sort of see that arc there. What I was going to say that I'm really excited for, which I think also fits into sort of him becoming this hardened rebel, is his personal relationships. So we know he's very connected to his friends from his home, like Bix and his friend the miner with the beard, whose name I can't remember. But I'm excited to see whether those relationships sort of fall by the wayside as he gets more entangled in the rebellion and what that does to him as a person. Like, what do you lose when you devote yourself to a cause? And I think that there's very much a parallel there with Luthen, and with Mon, with her daughter. Like, there's definitely potential to show, like, do you need to lose your humanity and your closeness with your loved ones in order to have a successful rebellion?
Oof. That hurts my heart, but you're right. It's a valid thing to explore.
Yeah, and especially with Bix, as somebody where Cassian has that really strong, close relationship with her. I mean, he's got relationships too with his other friends. But I think with everything Bix went through at Dedra's hands on Ferrix, all that torture, it seems from the trailer like she's getting a little bit involved in fighting back. And so I wonder if maybe the way that he loses her is not having to leave her behind to go do rebel stuff while she lives her life, but perhaps having to make peace with her death in the course of rebel activities. I wonder, which of those two possibilities, if either of them, we're going to see there.
Well, I'd be so bummed if she died, and I would be very against that as someone who is against girlfriends being killed for male motivation in stories. So I hope that doesn't happen, and Tony, I'm trusting you not to do that.
By the way, we were talking about Darth Vader earlier, and I think the question was about cameos in general, if I'm not mistaken. And I want to just put out there on the record, because in a few days we might know the answer, or maybe a few weeks. But I have a theory that I hope is not true. So there was a story, Tony Gilroy was talking to The Hollywood Reporter, and this came out on April 15th, which is the day we're recording this. And he was talking about how they had to recast one of the people from Yavin, presumably like a briefing room scene or something. They had a character they wanted to bring back from Rogue One. He was in the Yavin 4 briefing room, and they had to recast him. And I am going to just put out there, I don't want this to be true, but based on what he was saying about how scheduling and people's, how expensive it is to bring somebody back, I think it's possible that they might have recast Bail Organa. I hope it's not true. I hope if Bail Organa is in this show, it's Jimmy Smits, the one, the only. But I'm putting that out into the world. It's already, whatever is done. So I'm not manifesting. But that's my interpretation of this, and I hope that I'm wrong. But I'd be curious to know, would you be as mad as I am if they recast Bail Organa?
I would not.
Oh, we got a Jimmy
with
Smits hater here. Okay, interesting.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. I was saying I hate Jimmy Smits and I hate his portrayal of Bail Organa. You read me correctly. No, I mean, I like Jimmy Smits. I think he's a great actor, but I do not think Bail Organa is enough of a central character for me to feel passionately about his recasting. Like, if they recast Mon Mothma in this show, then I would be frustrated. But
then we would riot. I mean, we would
take to the streets. But Bale, I'm fine with it.
Yeah, I just have like a limited number of things I can think about in my life, and if it was a mutual a decision, and he was not like mistreated and fired for no reason, then it's fine with me.
Sorry, Eric.
Wow, I'm standing alone on this one, but that's okay. That's fine. I hope I'm wrong.
You know, my thing that I am like weirdly passionate about for season 2 is that I think season 1 was too human centric. There weren't enough weird aliens. You know, we saw a few weird aliens, but they were very background. There were no weird aliens that were like truly central to the plot. I want more weird aliens in season 2. That's my like. If we don't get more weird aliens, then I will be very disappointed, because Star Wars, like, it's Star Wars, it's science fiction, fantasy, space opera. There are weird aliens. One of the most iconic elements of the very first Star Wars movie in 1977 was the cantina scene, and that's when you really realized as a viewer, like, oh, we're in a totally different world. This is something new. This is something interesting. So I want some equivalent of the cantina scene, or just like, I want the practical effects. I want of like the prosthetics and the makeup. That's what I want. I want more weird aliens. And if we do not get more weird aliens, I will be very disappointed.
I think you're going to get it only because I remember after season 1, in all the interviews he did, Tony Gilroy did say that there were going to be more, because people were complaining about season 1, and he said something to the effect of, you know, we heard you, you know, there's going to be more in season 2. But I mean, that could have been, he might have been thinking of 1 or 2 scenes that were chock full of aliens that got cut, for all I know. I mean, he certainly hadn't finished writing back then, so it might not turn out to be true, but I do remember him saying that, because that was arguably the most consistently criticized element of season 1, a season that was not widely criticized for almost anything, was the fact that it really, in that very visceral way, it did not feel like Star Wars.
I agree. I want to see more of those weird little like worm drinks that they put in the drink and they're drinking it and it makes a little noise. It haunts me.
Is that your thing you feel strongly about? Like, what's your Bail Organa weird aliens thing?
They have to give me some closure on the weird, the side plot that's happening with the, like, child marriages. And the like, whatever culture that is that Mon Mothma is from, I need some more details and answers. And a rebellion against it. I would like that daughter not to get married at, like, age 14.
Well, we are going to see the wedding. We know from the trailers that we're going to see the wedding, so...
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
No!
Yep.
Sorry, I haven't watched the trailer.
It might not, you know, it might not happen as planned. Somebody might object. There might be an attack or something, but we are going to see the wedding.
I hope that it's a prank.
You hope that the entire wedding is a prank?
It's just a bit.
You know what? I was prepared for a lot of theories about season 2 of Andor. I was not ready for that one. I'm struggling to wrap my head around what that would mean exactly. So the daughter and the fiance just come out and tell their parents, like, we were just kidding?
Yeah, they're in it for the laughs.
I mean, arguably, depending on your definition of bit, you could say that Mon Mothma is arranging her daughter's marriage for the bit, and the bit just being, you know, the rebellion and her own personal political interests. So not a very funny bit, but she is committed to it.
It's going to be like an extraction scene, and Mon Mothma and the daughter are about to be rescued by the rebellion, and like they need to do it before they say I do. Like, that's what's going to happen. And there's going to be, like, dramatic music happening. I can almost guarantee it.
Haley, I think you're going to be really disappointed.
Yeah. Haley, I would not get your hopes up there.
Okay, fine.
In the trailer, there is a scene where you sort of see, like, the wedding reception and the dancing that they have. And it does look like we are going to be learning more about her planet's culture and sort of the politics around that. But the indication very much is that the horrible child bride wedding is going to go through.
Maybe in that culture, the reception happens before the wedding.
Wow. Grasping at straws.
Still
here.
time.
Hope springs eternal.
I think this does kind of bring us back to that earlier point, though, about do you have to cut off parts of yourself to make sacrifices for a greater cause? Because, you know, basically selling your daughter in a way that you were sold to be a child bride, that would be a pretty horrific thing for a character that we think of as not uncomplicated, but someone who is like inherently good. Like Mon Mothma is a good guy. She's on the side of the good guys. But if she does this, allows this to happen so that she can, you know, have access to capital to help fund the rebellion, like, at what point do you stop being a good guy? And I feel like it's very much that sort of question that's posed by Luthen in his major awesome monologue. Like, something like, I adopt the tools of my enemy to use against them. Like, do you have to cauterize parts of yourself for the greater good? And I think we probably are going to see an exploration of that in ways that will likely make us uncomfortable, unless Haley is right, and then we will all be, you know, bowing to her.
It will be so morally simple. There will be no exploration of that question.
No, it's all gonna be figured out.
Yeah, I mean, she's the classic principled character, right? And so seeing her start to compromise those principles and telling herself that it's for the greater good, I mean, that gets to a core element of a lot of political movements, which is people tell themselves it's all for the greater good. And sometimes that ends up being true and you're able to pull yourself back from the brink, but sometimes you really descend into an unrecognizable side of yourself because every step along the way feels justifiable. And I don't know that Andor has the time to really dig deep on that concept, but if any show does, I would say it's Andor.
If anybody does want to dig deep on that concept, I highly recommend Upbuilding Discourses in Various Spirits by Soren Kierkegaard. On page 141, he talks about ends and means, and it's very in-depth and something I think about constantly.
Wow, you have a page number citation and everything.
It's in my brain. It's wedged in my brain.
That was a much better comment than I was going to make, which was they're not going to be showing that sort of nuance with Mon Mothma because they're going to be too busy with the K2SO comic relief and jokes, and
right.
They just won't have time for Mon.
That's what I'm worried about. Haley, I'm surprised you didn't say you were looking forward to food. I think we're probably going to get some good food at the wedding, if not in other parts of the show.
I am. I mean, they really delivered last time. And like I said, I did mention the weird little worm drinks.
That's true, the worms.
I need to see more of those. If we're going to see a weird little wedding in this culture, there has to be those freaky little worm drinks.
I have a question. We didn't talk much about Dedra. We didn't talk at all about Cyril, but I think one of them might get a redemption arc, and I would love to hear who you think it will be, if one of them gets it.
I hope it's Cyril. He has, he wants justice to be done, and he needs to realize that it's not being done by the Empire.
I disagree. I hope it's Dedra.
Oh, interesting.
So here's the thing.
I feel like she's just straight up evil.
Yeah, that's exactly why it would be interesting. But here's the thing. I don't want either of them to have a redemption arc. I think that they are much more interesting as villains. I think Cyril in particular is much more interesting if you see him as sort of an avatar for this kind of radicalization and how easy it is to become basically a tool of a fascist regime. Just like you start off as a person who just wants justice, and then before you know it, you are like a tool of the empire. And I think that's a really interesting path to go down and explore. So I'd be disappointed if he got a redemption arc. I also think Dedra is just delightfully evil, and I don't really want her to have a redemption arc either. But of the two of them, I would rather it be her, and that's because she's done so much wrong, and she's been such a clear-cut villain. Like, what would redemption look like for that kind of person? Like, how do you come back from everything that she has done? Is there any way that you can ever atone for the kinds of wrongs that she has done? That would be interesting to me. Certainly more interesting than a Cyril redemption arc.
I think that's right. I think that it's, one of the successes of the first season was making us not necessarily relate to her, but like see something relatable in her early on, and then having that twisted against us once she really shows how much of a monster she is. And I think, continuing to make us sit with that in the second season, showing her doing terrible things, but at the same time showing a side of her that she doesn't let anybody else see, playing with that complexity further, I think is the best opportunity to make something useful out of her as a character, as opposed to that very sort of trite kind of, redemption. She becomes a good guy because we can't leave the audience feeling conflicted about her. We've got to give them validation for liking some part of her. I think Andor is not going to take that approach. I think they're more interested in having us wrestle with that complex feeling that we have about her.
But what about Cyril, Eric?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Grace was saying about the arc that he has and why it's interesting that he ends up where he does at the end of the first season, and then pushing him even further into commitment to the Empire. Again, it's very disturbing to look at his thought process and how he responds to the things that happen around him, but that's realistic. There are a lot of people who behave that way. And I think that is the best way to use his character. Don't redeem him. Don't give us the validation of, aha, bad guy, you see, you were wrong all along, and now you get to team up with our favorite good guy hero. Like, that's not what I want for him, and I don't think that's what's in store for him. I think he also is going to continue to serve that role of a true believer, a fervent believer, and somebody who maybe has, at some level, an understandable desire for law and order, stability, but goes about it in a really, really horrific way.
I disagree, because I'm ever the optimist and overly earnest. I actually do enjoy that kind of redemption, but not for. I feel like Dedra's too far gone, and like maybe it would be more powerful if it was her. But like I feel like Cyril, you can demonstrate all those things you're talking about, Grace, and explore that sometimes there is a point at which people realize like what they have like gotten themselves into, and that they can repent.
All right, well, as we wrap up here, is there anything else we didn't get to that anybody wants to mention as we look ahead here to season 2?
Is his name Nemec, the boy child who wrote the manifesto?
Yes.
The boy child.
The boy child.
The revolutionary boy child Nemec. I loved the manifesto, and I want to see a callback to that in some way.
We know that Cassian has the manifesto, so I feel like you don't do that unless you want that to be paid off at some point in the future. All right, that does it for our Andor preview show. Thank you so much for listening, and a special shout out to one of our youngest listeners, Chip. Thanks for listening, Chip. And for all Hoth Takes listeners, if you want to share your thoughts about this episode or suggest topics for future shows, you can email us at hothtakes@gmail.com. You can also find us on X and Blue Sky. We are under the name Hoth Takes. I'm Eric Geller on X. Grace is Grace_Seekers, and Haley is Birdnator. Haley made our wonderful logo and banner art, and I edited the show and put together our music. As always, for legal reasons, we have to tell you that all Star Wars music and sound effects are the intellectual property of Lucasfilm. You can find a complete archive of past episodes on our website, hothtakes.wordpress.com. And if you like the show, share it with a friend. You can find Hoth Takes on all the major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and Spotify. We will see you next time. May the Force be with you.